So today we're going to be taking a look at how to first deploy our contract on testnet and what that looks like. So using an actual wallet like Para Wallet and showing you how that works on testnet. And then we're actually going to be going through how to deploy our dApp and actually interact with it with the front end using TypeScript. So at the end of this session, you'll have seen the full stack developer experience on Algorand. All right, sweet. So we're first going to talk about how we set up our environment for our front end. So previously we've been working with Python, and now we're going to start migrating to JavaScript. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just how we set up our environment for JavaScript coming from that Python smart contract library or smart contract environment. And then we'll actually get into what's the code that we need to write in order to actually connect that front end to the smart contract that we've written with Python and Beaker. And by the end of it, we'll have a fully functional app that's deployed on testnet, and then we can interact with it using our Para wallet. If you have your local machine set up, you already have AlgoKit and all its dependencies installed, you can follow along on your local machine just the same, but here I'm using Gitpod just in case you don't have your dependencies set up. So here what it's doing on Gitpod is installing AlgoKit for me. As you can see here, it's a pipx install. I'm installing a specific branch of AlgoKit, but eventually that will get merged into the main release. And then what it's doing is going to set up our local network. So we're actually not going to be using this local network today. We're just going to be deploying on testnet. But this local network is what we're using in the previous sessions to actually test our contract. So now we can go ahead and see we should have this session4 directory. And if you don't have this, then you probably need to do a git pull. Make this bigger. So if you are in your workspace directory and just do a git pull, what that will do is pull the latest changes. So it will pull down this session4 directory. And I'll take a look at the session4 directory before we go into it. That's pretty much the exact same as the session3 directory. So it's the same code that we wrote last session. So here we have our app.py, which is our auction contract. Now the one difference between session3 and session4 is that we now have this web directory. So what I'm going to do, and that's where all of our web front end code will be. So I'm going to go ahead and open up session4. We're going to get some errors, and that's because before you open up session4, what you want to do is cd into it and do a AlgoKit bootstrap all, and that's going to set up your poetry dependencies, and it's also going to go ahead and install our web dependencies for us as well. I'll just give this a minute. Okay. So now we can actually open up the session4 directory. And we can see here that, again, we have our app.py. This first sanity check, what we're going to do is build and deploy, make sure everything is working as we expect it to. So we're launching our deploy script, which will build our contract. So we now see that we have all these artifacts, and then it deployed it on our local network. But we're not going to be focusing on the local network today. We're just going to be focusing on the web portion. So here in the web portion, we've set up a node development environment. So first, what I'm going to do is take a look at our package.json and talk about our dependencies here. So we have a couple of dependencies that are important. First of which is our Algo SDK dependency. And then we also have AlgoKit utils. And then we have, should be in here. Yes, also our Para Wallet Connect library. And that's what we're going to be using to connect our wallet on testnet to our front end. So in this package.json, these are the core dependencies. We also have a bunch of other dependencies that we're using for development, things like ESLint and Webpack. And so actually speaking of Webpack, we go ahead and take a look at our Webpack configuration. what this is basically doing is taking the source code that we will be writing and converting it into a web server that we can automatically deploy. So this Webpack configuration is mostly default. The one thing we're doing here is add a provide plugin, and we're providing a plugin for Buffer. And this is because the Wallet Connect library needs to use Buffer. And if we don't provide this to Webpack, then it will complain about not having access to Buffer. So you have that in here. Otherwise, everything else in our Webpack directory should remain relatively close to the defaults that you typically use when using Webpack with TypeScript. And I should also mention that we're using TypeScript here. We're not using React or any other library. We're just using native TypeScript to write our code. So that's our package and Webpack configuration. Our TypeScript configuration is also fairly default, nothing too fancy in here. One important thing you want to make sure that we have is our resolve JSON module is to true. And this is because in our artifacts, we generate some JSON files and we're going to want to be importing those. And so we want to make sure that we can import those by setting resolve JSON module to true in our TypeScript config. Now, if you're new to web development, that all might seem pretty confusing. It honestly still is to me. So that's why we provide this example code for you. And then also on Algorand DevRel, we have a Algo web template. I just realized that I haven't pushed the latest changes here yet, but basically this template includes all of those things like the package JSON, the TS config, the Webpack. It's all set up for you, and you can just go ahead and click use this template, create a new repository, and you can create a repo based on that template. And again, this is something that we're going to be constantly updating, so you can get started with web development using just native TypeScript and Webpack simply. Okay, so we've gone over the overall high-level setup, and let me open up my terminal. So when we did an AlgoKit Bootstrap, it should install all of our dependencies. But just to double check, we can run we're not in the web directory, make sure we're in session 4 web, run an npmi, and then I'll install any dependencies, but we already have them installed from AlgoKit, so it's not going to do it for us. But if you just wanted to come in here without AlgoKit, that's how you would do it. And then let's take a look first. First, let me actually show you what it's going to look like. So if I do a npm run serve, what it's going to do, it's going to first execute, make public. So that's one important thing on Gitpod. If you're following along Gitpod, make sure when that notification comes up, you click make public, or go into your ports, and here on port 8080, make sure that the lock icon here is unlocked, and that'll allow us to go to our web page. So before I go over what the web page looks like, talk a little bit about what the serve script is doing. So when I run npm run serve, this does really two things. First, it compiles our contract. So we're telling Poetry to run Python. And the reason we have Poetry run Python versus just Python is that this Poetry run tells us to run Python with all the dependencies we expect. If we just run Python, it might run our system Python, which will have the incorrect dependencies. So we want to make sure we do a Poetry run Python and execute our app.py, which if we take a look here, has our contract code, and at the very end, it will export it, which is what generates this artifact folder. So our serve is first basically compiling our contract, and then it's running Webpack serve to run the web server on localhost 8080.